But I mean, more and more and more, this is just looking like Trump is trying to do any peace deal that helps Russia win. It's like, how did Putin get to here? And I honestly don't think he intended to make an invasion like this. If you follow through history, what he did in Georgia, very similar. He invaded Georgia. They gave it they didn't have enough fuel. They just went down, made it a bit sink. They still occupied 2 parts of Georgia to this day, but they changed the leadership and they're like, okay, we control it. Let's go out. They show a big force, scare everybody, do what they do, tell them, and then that's it. They had 100,000 troops build up around the border. Biden was like saying like, they're going to invade. And even Zelensky's like, stop saying that. You're scaring away. You're not going to invade. Say they're just doing drills. They invade and they didn't have enough gas to drive to Kiev. So clearly they weren't planning on fighting. And it's true. A real invasion, you don't have 100,000 troops. You'd have like 1 million, right?
What's everybody? Joe here with the Middle Ground Mike. No left, no right forward. Today, I'm talking with a great guy. I've gotten to know him pretty well over the last couple of weeks. His name's Joe Edgar. He's one of 13 kids. Good gracious. You got a 9-digit real estate portfolio, I believe. You spent time with Governor Perry, Obama era small business, clean energy investing, and you got startups in Ukraine. To introduce yourself, tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, when you have the name Joe in my generation, then this calling, shows that is once you get too many Joes. I grew up being Joe E because originally there was like a Joseph, a Joe, and a Joey with a Y, but then later it became Joe E because there were so many Joes. They just gave you Joe and then your last initial. So through my grade school years, I was Joe E. So I think for this call, we can reference me as Joey. I think that fits in the.
Yeah, Joey works. That's what all my family, my side of the family, that's what they all call me. When they talk to my wife calls me Joe, but they will be like, "Hey, is Joey there?" And my wife always gets really thrown off by it,
Exactly.
because they call my dad Joe.
Well, we have in English in the U.S. culture, we have so many names that come with these automatic nicknames, and lots of other cultures don't have it quite the same. So I do try to there's Richard, Robert, Joseph. They all have like many variations of nicknames, as we all know. So yes, in other cultures, they're not quite the same. Their name is their name, but yeah, we can go by all kinds of flexibilities. But yeah, I mean, what you say is it true? I mean, I think a fun thing that I grew up on a reservation, so Klamath Indian, Southern Oregon. And then to contrast that, I ended up serving a mission in Australia, and I lived out with the Aboriginal people for 2 years. So a fun nuance that not too many people know. But yeah, I grew up real poor, one of 13 in a gorgeous, amazing place in Southern Oregon. Before it, I'll tell you, as poor as I was, but if you went there, I mean, I was spoiled rich with scenery and just, amazing place to grow up. The lake I grew up on is Agency Lake. And if you go there in the summer, it has so many worms. It's the largest lake in Oregon. But if you go there in the summer, it's so warm that it grows algae, like blue-green algae. And it's so thick, if you put your hand in it and pull it out, it'll be green. And we used to go down there and like swim. And it was just it was the closest lake. So we swam in it all the time. And we'd swim in it. And then you come out and you have leeches all over you. You just pull them off as kids, And like, it was like, yeah, you just got leeches. It was just like, you have leeches, And when I was a late teen, it turns out that the Japanese really like blue-green algae. It's still weird to me. But all of a sudden, a small business started up where it'd go out and run a filter and collect all the blue-green algae and make all these weird things and sell it in Japan. And now there's like 3 booming large businesses that do it all in and around that lake. So very strange. So if you put me in size, I'm the tallest in the family. And my father, maybe comes up to about here on me. My mother's here. So
what's your height?
I'm much taller. I'm only 6'2", 6'3".
That's that
yeah, but they're shorter. And I do tease people. I was the first one born on the reservation. And so I grew up, drinking blue-green algae as we swam all around. So that's why I, grew the tallest. So that's what I tell people.
Well, we were talking earlier, about a little bit about libertarianism, right? So kind of talking like, how do you go from those humble beginnings to that, to, give us like a path to how you ended up with Governor
I would say
office.
that's why I'm libertarian. So I'm a mixed up duck, and Chiloquin is home to some amazing fishing. It's Chiloquin, Oregon. If you're familiar with Oregon, Crater Lake, which is a gorgeous national park, that's my backyard. We were too poor to go to the ski mountains. So we, go up to Crater Lake in a van and hitch a ride and ride the backwoods down and then hitch a ride back up. That was our lift to, go snowboarding and skiing in the winter. But there's three main rivers that all meet right in the Chiloquin area, right on the reservation. And so it's just known for its crystal clear water, very cold, but amazing fishing. So what happened in Agency Lake is connected to Klamath Lake, and they used to be connected by a channel. And when I was younger, the tribe was fighting for the suckerfish. So the suckerfish that lived in Agency Lake, what I literally lived on, was an endangered species. They finally got it on the Endangered Species Act. This is during George W. Bush's era. They got on the Endangered Species Act and they were able to withdraw the watering rights. And the Klamath River feeds down to a lot of farmers. And so farmers ended up having such a large protest. And if you were to break down this community, it was a very staunch conservative farmers mixed with, I wouldn't call them liberal at all, mixed with Native American Indians. But they were on the side of a lot of liberals joined them. But if you know, most reservation is not liberal at all. It's a strange, almost say a dichotomy on a reservation. It's a sovereign nation, and they're more just anti, taking their land. So growing up in that and having this huge protest, they stopped all the farming. Dick Cheney came in and changed things overnight. He basically pulled the suckerfish off the endangered list. They opened up all the water. And, you saw basically all the work they had done for the suckerfish, which, to be honest, on the reservation, nobody cared about the suckerfish. They were really just trying to return a lot of water rights for other fish. But that was the first time I really saw politics and questioned myself, like, where do I fit into this? I'm not the crazy conservative, but I'm also not this wacko liberal. And so I started to see things in an interesting light, trying to understand what is this Republican Party? What is this Democratic Party? And they seemed the same. To me, it slowly defined what I would call a Republicrat. And the Republicrats were really more about taking any issue, and they ran the same office. It was just a matter of who was in office and whose friends they were paying for what. And as you kind of saw that happen, it's really where I said, man, there's got to be another thing that defines me. I'm a capitalist, but I'm socially liberal. I'm fiscally conservative, but like it's, your body. I'm anti-abortion, but I don't think it's anything of the government to dictate. Like I'm pro-adoption. I'm pro doing lots of stuff, but whatever, it's on you. I don't think the government has any business in there. And there's lots of things that I just found myself resonating within a reservation that's hidden in sort of this conservative community, that I found myself in a juxtaposition between, like, I sort of fit here, but I also don't fit here. And as I remember being on an airplane reading an article, and my brother and I, when I was 17, we'd started a business in Brazil. He had lived down there for a little while. So I was flying to Brazil and I read this article, and it was about the Libertarian Party, and it was like mind blowing. I was just like, wait, that's me. That's me. Everything in it. I was like, yes, that's exactly it. I don't care about all this other stuff, but we spend like crazy. There's non-appropriated taxation where they just tax us and then it doesn't actually go to anything. It's just one big coffer for them to spend. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, we're paying taxes, it should go for a purpose. And if there's no longer a purpose, then stop taxing. It's like, that just makes sense. It's like the whole point of taxes. So I'm not afraid of taxes. I'm not afraid of government. I'm not afraid of regulation, but it should be appropriate. You don't just create it for the sake of, hey, we tax it, now we need regulation to create jobs. That's not an answer. That's not an efficient government. So yeah, so that landed me into that. My father was a contractor, but he ran for the Justice of the Peace on the reservation. So, we used to make election signs for him. We'd paint them as kids, and we'd help him go set them up. So in those days, you couldn't buy plastic signs. It was wood. You had to buy a piece of plywood, prime it all white, and then paint on it. We literally were the backbone of his campaign. So I saw politics earlier, but it's a small reservation town. Population was 798 people. think it still
Was
is to this day. So
man,
yeah, so it to see outside of that in regards to politics was more, this endangered suckerfish happening on our lake was more of a national thing that was happening, right?
that's excuse me. Woo. When you're looking at that, like, how did you end up with those things? Like, so you're looking at libertarianism, right? And that seems to be we both have some principles there. How do you go from that to Governor Perry? You know what I mean? Because that's
Mm,
like that's a now I'm not saying a bad jump, right? Because there's some
yeah.
conservatives that I like too that libertarians would scoff at, right? And I'm sure your hardcore libertarian friends were like, "What are you doing?" They probably gave you that look of like traitor, and it's like, well, sometimes it's just the way life works, guys.
Yeah, the governor used to have a joke. Joe's our libertarian. He just touches the money. And that's what you want. A libertarian is known. Like, keep him away from policy, but man, he does great in the money. And that's really what
Right.
my role was. Is the governor's office. It's slightly different now with Greg Abbott's office, but Governor Perry at the time managed, no one really knew this, but his office managed about $2 billion in funds. And they were broken up in a number of different programs. And I first got there, I did an undergrad in University of Oregon, focused on economics, and I wanted to come to Texas and study economics and a PhD. And I wanted to ultimately get into the Dallas Federal Reserve. It was like my ambition. I just loved monetary policy. I loved economics. And if you know anything about the Fed, most of the data comes out of Texas. So the Texas Federal Reserve. So while I was doing that and trying to work at that, you're always trying to fill little gaps. And there was an internship at the governor's office. So I took it. And at the time, LIBOR had shot up. If you remember this, like 2008, LIBOR had shot up.
Oh
Later,
yeah.
we learned it was due to manipulation, but LIBOR had shot up to like 8.5%. And some of the funds were looking insolvent. So when I got there was the governor and the governor appointed board were all in a panic and what was called the Economic Development Bank. So most don't know this, but the governor's office actually has what it's legislatively a bank that's $2 billion for the most part. And
Jeez.
by a bank, I mean they don't hold any cash. It's literally program bonds that they can use, but it's still money to be deployed. And they were looking at this program saying it's insolvent. It's upside down. Should we shut it all down? Should we pay off these bonds? Like, what are we panicked? And the program I had started with was the Product Development Small Business Fund, which was started as $50 million put together at it. You probably don't, if you knew of it, you probably wouldn't remember it either. But Cimatech was a big consortium that was to put together tech. All of Texas came to do it. It was a big international national effort in the United States. And it was put into San Antonio and Austin, kind of in between. And Cimatech was a massive thing to bring us chips and move us forward on a lot of technology. It was before the Biden era for chips. It was the biggest consortium to build chips and bring this country into the age of technology in the form of, advanced chips. So Cimatech, they put together a lot of incentives to do it. So one of these funds was made for them. Cimatech, after all their incentives went out, they left and went to New York. And so some of these funds were still sitting there. And this is where during LIBOR's gyration in 2008, it was left to say, okay, well, what should we do with these funds? We're upside down. So I built this model that says, wow, I mean, actually, you know, you could take this program and use it for what it's for. I mean, it's economically designed to do this to essentially help lots of tech startups all over Texas, and it could grow into be an evergreen fund. And as I like to say, and everyone that says, I didn't make the policy. If I was in office to fight for the policy, I would have said no, because I'm a libertarian. But if they're going to make a program, then let a libertarian run it. And so we redesigned a lot of it to make it where we don't pay fees and do lots of stuff
Nice.
along those fashions. So it really benefits the state. But later I got pulled in and I ended up going full time to run all the funds. And so at the end, I was running all the funds except for one, which was the Emerging Technology Fund. And the Emerging Technology Fund was interesting. It was a little over 200 million that was
Jeez.
put into Texas to focus on early stage startups. It was a very big effort. And unfortunately, the people running the fund in our office, I'd come from Oregon. I'd already built quite a real estate portfolio. I'd, made a fair little bit of money for being such a young person. And I was investing in startups. And so I was going to these angel network meetings and I would see him there and I'd be like, oh, that's weird. Why he's there? And he would be there with a particular company. And it looked dirty then. And later we found out, he was basically taking kickbacks to help walk them through the process. So it was a whole shamble. And they went through about 3 different directors that it did not run well. It's probably the worst run fund in the world, but it did lead to a lot of the reason why Austin is a tech hub today. I would say most of the money did not get efficiently invested, but it did get effectively used. Now, the reason that's important is as I built up the rest of the funds, the governor's office ended up making a lot of money that was able to be deployed for other uses. Well, you can be pro and against that, but that's what happens when you hire a libertarian to run a fund. It's going to be very efficient. And during 2010, so I was with the governor for about 4 years. And then in 2010, under the Obama administration, was the Jobs Act. And the Jobs Act, they created what was called the SSBCI, the State Small Business Credit Initiative. And under that, Texas was given another 50 million. And it was to be deployed in the form of a few programs to help grow jobs. And if you remember in those times, the governor was running for office. And so it would look bad to say, we're taking Obama's federal money. And so they're like, well, I'm not giving it back, but we can't take it. So I ended up taking those funds because they were literally undescribed funds that you could put to work. And I ended up trying to find an office. So I knocked on all the doors and I found Commissioner Staples in the Department of Agriculture was willing to take us. And we went and set up shop at the Department of Agriculture and we ran Texas's only fund of funds. And what that means is we invest in venture capitalists. So we created what the Emerging Technology Fund should have been effectively. And it's still today the best run fund. Unfortunately, it is not deemed evergreen because the commissioner ended up using the money that came back to help horse grants. But nonetheless, it was one of the best job creator programs that the state has really ever seen. And we invest in what we did is we invest in venture capitalists that had funds. We did not pay a management fee. That was one of the rules. And we're the only partner in there not to pay a management fee. We required first return of capital. And to put that together is not an easy model to do. But we really had to engineer things properly. And it ended up creating a really great program that produced a lot of jobs and a lot of the businesses here in Texas. Many don't even know that was a part of their investment thesis. So yeah, that put me both in Governor Perry's office and then later under the Small Business Administration into the Obama administration office. So you can see where my politics put me right square in the middle, which I call myself a nice libertarian centralist. So both under with the Obama administration on one side and the Perry administration on the other side. Joe only touches our money, as they say.
No, I mean, that's, like we were talking, you were just saying about how some of them, were paying people or getting paid to consult or walk them through it. For small business owners out there watching this, right? Is government funding like rigged? So, like, the reason why I asked that is per se, right? So, here in Michigan, one of the big talking points, or it ended up, they paused or canceled it, is I forget what the fund exact was called. It was, but essentially it was money they would give to companies to start plants, things like that. And where I drew an issue with it is if we're giving plant X $100 million, right? How can we ensure plant X is going to be there for more than 3 or 4 years and not run off with our money? Because if we're giving you $100 million and you close shop in 3 years, you didn't pay those people's salaries. We did.
So most of the state programs are run different. So there's some where it's like the small business, and those are mostly run out of the SBA, the Small Business Administration. So those are the ones where you get these small little loans or things like that. And then they have a side program, and the side program will go into these really small SBCIs, and these SBCIs they'll do things like $5 loans, $50,000, very, very small loans that go mostly to help small communities. And it's coincidentally, we're talking about that it's been completely defunded under the Trump administration. So, and those are here and there where they impact. I don't know. I never really dealt in them. That's just that part. But then you go into what is called economic development. And all the states compete on economic development. Economic
Yes.
development, and anytime you're in politics, I don't, if you've run for office, then you learn this really fast. The word jobs is like crack cocaine. All politicians are high on jobs. Anytime they can say the word, they created jobs, there's jobs, they will say the word jobs as many times as they can say. And so when they're trying to do jobs, that is the heart of any office of economic development. And most governors love to say that they're promoting jobs. So in the name of, running for office, they end up bringing in the economic development office into their office. And so when they go to promote jobs, they now say, okay, well, we have a few things we do to try to bring big companies here because they don't want that's not really small business. It's not startups for sure. These are established big companies. These are manufacturing companies. These are all the different type of jobs they're trying to get. These aren't data centers. These are job producers. So when they do that, now they have usually 3 different tools they use. Every state's different, but these are the basic tools and they're almost all the same. And one of them is going to be like the actual job program, and that is payroll. So what they do is they hire so many, they show the entire payroll, and with the payroll, they will get tax reimbursements from that. So they'll get this funding, right? And that just runs with jobs. So the only way you get that is you hire jobs. You meet certain requirements to actually produce the number of jobs that you said you would, and you'll get the incentives. And so if you do not hire, you don't get. And so it's a match, right? So that one you're like, okay, well, it makes sense. They made the jobs, they get some of that money back, right? And then a second one will be like upfront capital. And upfront capital is the one that usually always makes the news the most because the other one, it's hard to explain. They did some, weird thing, but they created jobs. So it's not so catchy. Upfront capital is different. And upfront capital, they sometimes will give it in the form of a grant and they'll expect it to be paid back. And it could be through the avenue of property taxes. And so in that regard, they're saying like, okay, like a loan, you're locked in for 10 years. And Cimatech did this very thing. As soon as their time was up, they're like, okay, we're out of here. We used all this up. Many Walmarts have been recruited on these grounds. Many businesses come here where they say, okay, we'll give you upfront cash. And it's literally abatement, right? You're getting property tax abatement, and then they will have to pay it back over time. And as soon as it expires, you expect them to stay. But a lot of times they leave. So, and then the third one is you'll have a mixture of these property tax kind of mechanisms that move forward. So you get a match. So we didn't give you any. It's not funding up front. It is part of your property tax that we're going to keep it at a low level for this time period. So it's not so easy. So a business, it's very rare that a business comes in and let's say they put together a 10-year package.
Right.
That they only stay 3 years because the 10 years is a good package. So they will normally stay there. But what it does cause is a lot of states compete. And is it great for all of our states to be competing for jobs? Because it's kind of like crabs in a bucket. But where it is important is, for example, two big deals that we did here in Texas. One of them was Caterpillar, where we literally took plants from Illinois. So we took from one state to move to the other. And Texas is going to argue all day, yeah, that was a great deal. And as a country, we're saying, well, we took jobs from Illinois and moved into Texas. I don't know. But
Right.
another deal, we did Toyota in San Antonio. And Toyota is a multi-billion-dollar deal, and it's still producing Tacomas down there. It's a very big manufacturing company, and we got it from Japan. So that's a whole different business where it's like, it is good to have this because you're now getting internationally. They could have put it anywhere. We are trying to find places to, land it into your state or your community. So, and then if you break that down, every single county, every single city has their own economic development office, and they're all competing in the state to get them. So economic development is a big push. And does it come out? Like every program knows the math has to work out or it's not going to be an efficient one. And sometimes they don't work out. But yeah, is it the best use of funds? It's a hard one to argue. I mean, in Texas, I think there was a time to use it, but Texas has a lot going for it. So then there's another time where you're like, well, you don't need to use it anymore because so many companies actually want to relocate here. It's just a great place to set up shop. There's no income tax. There's what's called the margin tax for business, but it's pretty low. It's 1%. And it's, lots of areas you can come in and find, great affordable property. Austin no longer, but there's still communities all over Texas where you can find affordable property for your employees. Texas is a very young state, mostly because of a Hispanic population that have a lot of kids. So it's a younger state. Toyota used that as one of its main deciding factors to say, hey, we got this young place. So at one point, like, are we just, using money just to overkill, winning a deal when people will come here anyways? And a good example would be, Tesla. Everyone in the state tried to bring Tesla's first battery factory here. They did everything they could to win it, and they were basically played. They already had planned to put it into Reno, Nevada. So behind the scenes, they just messed with them, and then they put it in Reno. However, look where Tesla's headquartered now.
Yeah, down in
I
Texas.
mean, so eventually it's like they're going to come here without an incentive anyways. California, unfortunately, does so many things to chase business away, and Texas is trying to bring them. So eventually, like, we don't need the policy, but you do need to do things. Another one is, if you remember, it's only a few years ago, Amazon was deciding where it's going to put its big headquarters. So that's a big one, because you're like, oh, it's a big company. But these companies are doing this on a smaller level all the time, everywhere, and everybody's fighting to try to figure them out. Because if some business, like, I need a rail spur, I need to have a lot of electricity, I need massive amount of water. So you need all these logistics in the actual property, but then you need a great, economic plan that kind of goes together. So if you're, Amazon just gives you an example of what is available for everyone and how everybody fights to get it, and they'll create, some kind of package. But you end up seeing it, they do actually boost the economy. The local economy grows a lot because you have every dollar in a job ends up being an economic impact. It's spending. Same as immigration. It's why I think this entire deportation is foolish. It'll only make real estate worse for us. But all of those people, if you just count the impact of what they spend, beyond the fact that they already pay property taxes because they pay rent, they pay fuel taxes because they buy fuel, and they pay sales tax because they buy stuff. Besides the fact that, they pay taxes, they actually buy stuff. And that is, helping all of us. Those are the local business. Those are jobs, is that spending. So yeah, I don't know what you even asked me in the beginning. I went on a raid, but hopefully that
Well,
sums it up.
no, I mean, no, that's pretty, kind of like talking about Tesla, that, like clean energy and capital. That's kind of what I got here. But, I know electric cars and things like that and solar panels are like the wave, right? But some technology that I've been really looking into that I think is very undersold in this country, because it's one of our most biggest natural resources, hydrogen. And I feel
Mm.
like hydrogen is still so expensive because the amount of investment in hydrogen is like minuscule compared to electric cars. And the reason why I say that is just so in northern states, like where I'm from, during the wintertime, man, your battery power goes, it goes down. It's just part of the climate, right? And I don't know about you, but I don't know if I'd be trusting, if I'm a business hauling my stuff, in an all electric semi truck across the country.
And a hydrogen car.
Well,
They
no,
have
no,
worked on some foam battery or foam fuel cells. So if they get in an accident, then it'll help
yeah.
protect it.
Well, my thing is so we talk about, another boom here, right? In capital. Could you imagine if they really went in hard on hydrogen, what that would do to the energy industry? In reality, if I'm big oil, I'm looking at that going, well, I already own half of those places. So why don't I get in bed with the auto companies? We make this happen because we've already got part of the infrastructure already exists. I guess, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you invest in clean capital, right? So I'm talking from an ignorant standpoint.
I mean, I don't actively invest in clean energy currently, but I did was part of a fund, Petrus Capital, and that's what we focused on as a venture fund. We focused on clean energies. Now, we did lots of stuff in Texas. Texas is a fun state to have really an energy conversation. So that's why I hate this. Is all like, this is going to be the Texas theme show. But why Texas is interesting is it's kind of a microcosm for the whole country. It has a grid that starts and stops in the state. Many
Right.
don't know, but Texas is the largest producer of alternative energy in the country, way more than California. Most don't think, they think like, oh, Texas is an oil state, but they don't know that 40% of our energy is produced through wind. We're now passing 10% is produced through solar, about 2%, which is nuclear, but most of it is now alternative. We still have a lot of coal that is produced, but no new coal plants. Natural gas makes up the bulk of really what is left in there. So Texas produces a lot of power, and a lot of it's alternative energy, which, when you say clean energy, it's become a toxic word. It's hard to define what clean energy. I'm from Oregon, and originally from Oregon, and Oregon has lots of hydropower, and we call it now alternative energy because it's hard to say if that's clean. you know, Georgia Pacific finally took out all of the 3 plants. It was really Warren Buffett that took out the 3 dams, and one of them was in my town, Chiloquin, so the salmon could finally make it back up the river. So in Oregon, we would say hydro, or at least on the reservation, we'd say hydropower is not clean. It's an alternative fuel, not a clean fuel. So that's why I use the word alternative. But Texas is a great microcosm for what this energy is doing, especially right now where you see this AI drive. So if you look at how much power these data centers are going to have, it's really compute power on these data centers and what they're having to produce. Like, they get very hot. So you have 2 things. You have the processors themselves that need electricity, and then you have to cool them down, and that also needs electricity. So you just have the tremendous amount of electricity that gets drawn on. And to make that efficiency is different than what we were doing necessarily with quote unquote clean energy. This is where you're seeing it's more than doubling every year, the demand for AI. And this is going to leave our country needing to produce. So you are seeing some places having to create their own centers. So Google's looking to this. Facebook is doing this now, where they're literally producing electricity on site. And some of them, they're using hydro. So they're literally drilling down to try to find access to either geothermal and run an entire power plant individually on site. And so some of them are doing mass solar and trying to literally produce the power on site because it's just harder to get the grid. Some of them are producing so much power that they're shooting it out. You have even some who are doing nuclear power, and they're trying to create these small container units.
Yep,
And they
I've
think
seen
they're
those.
only about 5 years off from being
Well,
able to have those. So we'll see. But yeah, those are an interesting piece. But what we did was really took, as far as clean energy, is we took a normal building, and the building itself can have lots of efficiencies, but it doesn't because of the way the owner structures work. And we created a thing in legislation called an assessment. So it makes it so the building can be the borrower and do all these improvements that it can get. It's less sexy to talk about, but that's where we really focus more on, the current usage, because you can get a building to produce or to consume half of its power demand just by adding inefficiencies. But due to the owners and the triple net lease for the renter, or the groups who are leasing the building, they just won't do it. And so it depends on
jeez.
where you want to go, but that's a boring conversation, but it's needed.
No, I mean, I guess I go on the tirade, if you want to call it that. I like to go on about hydrogen, right? Because here's my
Mm,
thing. First, it's the fuel supply. We have, I think, we're one of the biggest natural gas reserves in the world. I think we're top
yeah,
3.
right here in Texas. It's
Right.
all
And then,
geofracking. That's where Houston is now the largest exporter of that liquid natural gas, and it's shipping it to Europe.
yeah, and you don't have to worry about generating the electricity. You don't have to, and I mean, I know it's still going to take a lot of rare earth minerals, right? But you can help offset that with the hydrogen. And, because to me, my biggest problem with the clean energy alternative is we're too busy trying to compete with China. China's going to be able to make solar panels a whole lot cheaper than we can.
Well, shockingly, most of China's power isn't solar. So it's been growing a lot. They produce a lot of power, but it's a lot of coal plants. So there isn't as clean as it sounds.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm talking in terms of like competing for clean energy growth.
Gotcha.
Price wise, they're going to be able to beat us.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
we need to. I just did a recording. I don't know whatever day of the week it is. I'm always recording so much with a gentleman, calls himself Z because I couldn't. He's got a Chinese name. He did U.S. China relations in the Obama administration with like economics and all that stuff. And one of the big things he was saying is America needs to focus on what we're good at, right? Because what we can do here is we can go in our garage, tinker, and build something. The Chinese can't do that because it's so crowded. But what they can do is they can make a factory to produce a crap ton of solar panels at an even cheaper rate than you ever will. But what can we do better than them? we'd be able to produce hydrogen cars faster and better and have cheaper energy. And we'd be able to provide all of our allies with those resources. And,
I mean,
and I,
if we developed it for sure.
yeah, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, okay, where's the Elon Musk of this situation? Because, you get one of those guys in there like that and it's off to the
Well,
races, and
hydrogen's a hard thing to distribute is part of the problem.
yeah,
So that's where, how do you store it, move it? I mean, imagine having to set up fuel stations everywhere with hydrogen. And that's where you're talking about an entirely new infrastructure. So I don't really blame Elon. I know he's already gone through this. This was part of his strategy and saying, what is going to be the new fuel? And he really looked and said, electricity is it. I mean, you only have 7 moving parts, a car in motion with, regenerative brakes. I mean, there's few parts. I mean, you really can make a little, iPhone on wheels. And so that just makes sense. Our house already has electricity. You can easily plug it in. It's already distributed. So it made sense to be electricity. It makes sense still. And it's why China ran with it. If you look at our country versus China, where real impact is adaption for electrical car use in China is astronomical. It is just
oh, yeah,
exponential growing. And the US has gone flat. I mean, Ford is going to shut down their F-150 program.
yeah, they do it here in Michigan.
GM is looking at saying like, all right, we're going to have to bail on this. And not too long ago, Biden was championing GM as being like the leader, which is so weird because obviously everyone knows Musk led and really created the electric car industry. Not saying he invented the first one or brought the first one online, but he put all his marbles behind Tesla to move it to a big one. So Rivian and the rest of them kind of followed in that wave, but even there are slowed down. I mean, there's just not as much of a demand in the US for an electrical car for some reason. It's and I have 2 of them plus a hybrid. I actually really like the electrical cars. I don't seem to have a range anxiety, but I know many people have this range anxiety.
That's well, I drive a V6 pickup truck.
Mhm.
Now when I got this one, I did downsize. Okay, I had a big
Gotcha.
V8 5.4 liter before that,
That's your downsides.
so I went down to a V6
I got rid of the
EcoBoost.
Hemi. I brought it down to a 6.
I downsized a little bit, but I think that's where. So I know Mercedes Benz and I think Audi or Volkswagen are testing hydrogen powered semis, things of that nature in
Yeah.
Germany and in Australia. Because there are fueling stations. Ford is built. I think they already have 1 or 2 here, and they're building a couple more in Michigan.
Well, they do a lot in Norway.
Yeah,
They have access to hydrogen coming out of the ground, so they tap into them. So for them to experiment, it makes sense because you have easy access to hydrogen.
yeah. I think for me, it's probably going to be. I forgot one analysis I read said that the hydrogen may end up being the new diesel,
Mm,
where electric is your consumer car, in diesel, and hydrogen becomes your how do you move heavy freight because you can fuel it up and you don't got to worry about recharging.
right.
And so I think
Well,
that's
like
kind of where
its
Mercedes is going.
efficiency is that when you fill it up, it gets so many miles that.
Right. Yeah, I mean that the problem with electric is just again the charging. How do you do that?
Well,
How do you do that on industrial
it
scale?
really puts it as to the point where the technology advancement isn't so much electric cars, it's battery. It's
Yeah.
all about the battery. Like, can you make a battery that is small and holds a long charge and it's, sustainable life is not 7 years. So will it last a long time? Because if you did that, I mean, imagine your house could have a battery, your car can have a battery, and it would charge. Because when you build a power plant, you have to build it for peak demand. So whenever it's fully operating and when in Texas, it's when everybody has their air conditioner on. So it's
I
the
can
hottest time of the day. And when that happens, you need to build it for peak, but the rest of the time you don't use peak. So you have a power generator that could produce at peak all the time, but there's no demand. So when you have batteries, you can say, okay, well, at 2 to 5 in the afternoon, nobody's charging their batteries. Everybody's running their air conditioner. But then from 5 to midnight, everybody's now offsetting all of their batteries and it offsets the peak demand. You don't have to build any more electrical power plants because now you have batteries. And this has been proven to work because now in Texas, we have alternating prices on our electricity. So if you want to charge your car, it's best to do it at night because if you do it during the day, it's usually expensive. But that's finally changed this last year because so many companies are building battery cells. So they use like old containers, and
Yeah.
they use a whole bunch of old batteries, and they build these of old batteries. They're recycling them in the sense by reusing them, repurposing them, and they just charge off the grid during off times. And now we have used those batteries to fill the grid. So for the first time, you've seen the cheapest power be sometimes during 2 to 3 in the afternoon, because there's so many people wanting putting power on the grid. So it's like weird, because normally that'd be the most expensive. You're like, it's the cheapest power. So very strange with batteries. If battery, batteries where the technology hides, and that's where you'd say hydrogen, they know how to do it. It's like how to distribute it. Electricity, it's really batteries. And on clean energy, yes, there's lots of new tech coming in nuclear, and they're even trying to get the 3 Mile Island, back alive. You have Bill Gates and his pet project trying to bring one. But the real one is, of course, the ultimate, which is fusion. And
Yes.
fusion, they have now had it sustained for 22 minutes, but they still have a problem with how do you harness that much heat on this planet? How can you hold it? And it just keeps melting everything. So they create this plasma gas, and the plasma gas is so hard, but how do you contain it? And so they've tried liquid metal, and it goes out, and they've got all kinds of different things, but all the new technologies is how do you contain that much heat to create fusion? And so if they ultimately solve fusion, then we've solved all of our problems, because you can just have fusion everywhere. Electricity, just spew it out. You don't need a battery anymore. So each one of those are at the forefront, where if one of those hits, just a revolutionary win in innovation, I mean, it would change everything we know about our world right now. So if batteries have a huge win, to where now they can hold weeks worth of energy, and a battery cell, like oil just became worthless. So also, that battery wins. Or if hydrogen, if we can, move it to where it's distributed all over the place, that would be a big win. But fusion would be the big one. If we solve fusion, I mean, electricity becomes free. It would change the world in every way.
No, I mean, I totally get. I guess for I totally get that part because that would be actually pretty good. But you're lucky to be in Texas where you guys don't go through the cold weather. And your battery goes crazy.
It's our winter right now. It's like 80 today. And I was kind of
Oh,
like, I might
Jesus.
put on a sweater.
80 degrees. I'm out there in shorts and flip flops, man. Like, let's go to the lake
I
today.
know.
But my wife had at one point she had a Ford Escape hybrid.
Mm.
And it would, like if you were going like under a certain mile an hour or whatever, it would just run on the battery.
Yeah. I like the hybrid. Yeah.
Yeah. So as soon as it hit winter, that thing barely ran on the battery, barely. And that's where I guess for me, that's where I'm kind of
Battery
like,
degradation.
yeah, I'm kind of like, okay, I,
Because they
I get,
change. Even in Texas, when it's really hot, you lose efficiency on the
yes.
battery. And when it's really cold, you lose
Oh, I didn't
efficiency on
know
the
that
battery.
happened when it
Yep.
was hot though.
Yep. Hot as well. So that's why solar panels, the hotter your solar panels, the less electricity they produce. Kind of like, well, that's lame. So that's why if you have solar panels mixed with like a hot water heater where it's running water, it becomes your hot water heater. You're actually making it more efficient, cooling it off. But yeah, heat and cold are not great for electricity. So you have to balance both of them. When it's really, really hot, sometimes your car just won't start. So you have to maintain where it is. Now
Okay,
that's
see, now
really
that's
hot.
something new.
I've been in Texas. We've lived. I've never had it happen, but it's known to happen. But yeah, in the same place I've heard somewhere it's really, really cold and it won't start.
See, now that's something new. To be honest, I've never once heard that because I
Yeah.
forgot who was it. God, I'm trying to think of the guy that said it. But essentially, somebody had said, "Well, if you took the what is it, Death Valley or whatever, and you put all these solar panels in there, you could power the whole United States." And I
Yeah, it'd
was
be a
always,
terrible place for it.
and I'm sitting there thinking in my head, I'm like, "Well, yeah,
That's
no shit. Why don't we
that
do
makes
that?"
sense.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
no, electricity will, or the heat is definitely not conducive. So you'd probably start a whole bunch of solar panels on fire
See,
in
now,
Death Valley, because
that
it'd
is
be like
something that I did not
140 to
know.
150 degrees. So it's not great.
Wow,
So yeah.
that's something I didn't
In
know. That's what I'm
fact,
like.
if you were to like make the best place, even though it gets snow, so that's the only part with it. But Colorado's like a great place. Denver gets so much sun. If it just didn't get any snow, but they are at the right temperature where they never, get really hot. So you're like maybe in the summer it's 80, but Denver would produce great power because You just stay at a nice moderate temperature during the summer, and your winters, you have a lot of sunny days. So oddly enough, Denver gets a lot. They're comparable to Austin for sunny days. It's just when it's not sunny, it's like a blizzard storm shooting down on you.
Man, that's that part, I guess that part just baffles me. I mean, just, from like an ignorant layman's perspective, right? You're sitting there and you're going, well, fuck, it's always sunny there. Why
Right.
aren't we just piling these things in there
Well,
like, on
sun
a massive
sun is
scale?
sun is the needed part, but the
Right.
the temperature is definitely one to be cognizant of.
I'm just, I'm not going to lie to you. I am completely and utterly astonished on that one. That definitely, you learn something new every day. Let's kind of go on to one of, I would say, our favorite topics, but building in crisis, right? Ukraine. That's
Mm,
high risk. That's high risk entrepreneurship, business, whatever you want to call it. I mean, not
that's the
just from
frontier.
I mean, not even just from like physical safety perspective, but from a like a money perspective. That just kind of seems
Mm.
like it's like a big gamble. It's not on most investors' short list. How did that relationship start for you?
So, it's a great question because it's like I go to Ukraine often. I was just there 2 weeks ago. Um, yeah, how did that happen? So, I was with the, Obama administration, and I was you can only give so much time to the state before I'm just like, I'm an entrepreneur by heart, and I have to get out of this. Like, I've done as much as I can. I created this other fund, J4T Ventures, which was deploying capital, was working great. But I was like, I've really given all I can to the state. And so to me, it was just an itch where I had two things I wanted to start. One of them was Texas Pace Authority, which is the clean energy side. So it's a nonprofit, runs here in Austin. We had to get legislation passed. So I wanted to start that. And the second one was TenantCloud. TenantCloud was a property management software. I had a whole lot of rentals at the time, and all my rentals, I noticed there's lots of software for multifamily, but there was nothing for the DIY landlord who's managing something. And as I looked into it, I found out that's 70% of the rent market. So hundreds of billions of dollars in rent are done just by paper check mostly is how people manage it. So I was like, man, there's just such a market. So I wanted to start these two companies. I knew very well what I did. So I left, and that was mid 2014. And I started looking around. I was in venture. So I was caveing out to work with Petros for a while I did this. And so I was seeing lots of deals. I did my MBA in Cornell, and then I went on to be a Kauffman Fellow. So I was in venture capital as deep as you could get. I saw all the deals you could imagine. And so to me, just starting from scratch made no sense. I see companies die all the time. I'm like, I need to just go find a shell and, morph it into something I need it to be. So I went on the hunt for one of these shells, and I finally got, I reached out to a few of them. One of them was in Oregon. I had a proclivity to Oregon. I was from there, and they had just raised 5 million, so they were a bit sassy.
Oh man.
We went on later to be rivals, but that was fun. So I ended up in Chicago, and I'm at this restaurant, and I'm sitting across from two guys who at the time I really didn't know that much about Ukraine. So I would describe them as what I thought were Russians. So these tattooed guys sitting across their arms folded, saying nothing. Later, I mean, they're really nice fellows, and I got to know them really well. But at the first time, I was just like, this is weird. Why aren't you talking? What's going on? So I'm trying to have a conversation, tell them about like, I think, here's my idea. Here's where I want to take your company. I mean, it's basically dead, and I want to reinvent it into something new. Da da da. They were just like, so it turns out they're Ukrainian. They came over. I think they had been there maybe 5 years at that time, and they were both young entrepreneurs trying to build stuff, but just struggling in, an area. Chicago has the Ukrainian village. So there's lots of Ukrainians and lots of Russians. I think there's estimated like 1 million Russians and about 300,000 Ukrainians in Chicago alone. News
Oh,
to me.
jeez.
I didn't know that until I went there. But it was great. I mean, I was like, okay, well, let's take this and morph it into something, and they kind of agreed. So we did this original deal. They had developers in Ukraine, and I had said, well, we're going to move all them to Austin. Not move them, but we're actually going to stop the Ukrainians, and we're going to hire people in Austin. So we're going to replace them here. So we did. We had some very senior people start up and doing stuff. And it was just mind boggling how our junior Ukrainian developers were doing laps around our senior Americans. And I'm just like, what is going on? Like these guys, I mean, they're producing stuff like crazy, and you all are talking about mental health days. So it was frustrating to me. So I said, that's it. I'm getting on a plane. So this is 2015. So I get on a plane and I go and check it out. So my first experience in Ukraine, just plain, Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe because it has what's called black soil. Now, everybody said this black soil. I was just like, so your dirt's black? Yeah, a lot of people have black dirt, but it's actually a type of soil. It is black soil, Chorny Zimli, and it is the most fertile soil in all of the world, not to mention Europe. It literally is the breadbasket. You put anything in the soil and you don't have to do anything and it will grow. It's amazing. So they grow. Everybody's got a garden. Everybody grows something. They can lots of things. They're very resilient people. But it was a wake up call to find out, to learn a lot about the Soviet Union, to learn about, when the wall fell in 89, the impact it had, just because the talent there was so rich, it was mind boggling that everyone is developing. People are creating stuff left and right. They live and breathe tech. And my mind was so blown that I was like, okay, we are definitely keeping all these people and we're going to have to expand this team. This is just amazing. So we literally started the company there. And so one of our entities is literally based out of Ukraine. And so we grew up a team. Eventually we had, I don't know, 250, people there at one time. And we have very Silicon-esque looking office. I mean, this is my last company. And we just grew it. And as I'd gone there to 2014, the invasion, this is just post the invasion of Crimea, that was definitely something that was part of the time that you could not help but learn a lot about. And so now, since then, I've traveled to Ukraine 5 to 6 times a year for over the last decade throughout the invasion. So I now have a well enriched insight into how Ukraine views this entire invasion. But yeah, that's how I got there and how I've stuck around. So I sold my last company 2 years ago, and I started 2 more that are now based really out of Ukraine. So know it well, travel there, love the people, I love the food, but yeah, I could go down lots
So
of rabbit holes with that.
kind of parlaying on that, if you want to call it, right? What do the Ukrainian people think of the situation there? Just like a generalization, right? Of the situation there and like per se our response and our business response, like how do they feel about all that?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few things that need to somewhat understand, and that is, there's this whole idea of the DNR. This is the Donetsk, separatist people. No, that is a farce. There are definitely people who are supportive of Russia, right? But they don't want to be part of Russia. So that's a farce. And Crimea did not want to be part of Russia. That's a farce. So if you really back this up, you have to say, okay, well, let's see, where is the history of where a lot of these things happen? And we can go to various parts of history, but I think one of the first ones that's worth talking about is in 91. 91 was an opportunity where Ukraine wanted to separate, right? The USSR had already sort of fractured. Lithuania was the first one where Gorbachev was like, well, fine, if you're going to leave, we'll let you. And then when they're like, we're leaving, and they're like, wait. So they sent troops literally to stop them because they didn't think they would leave. He went there and gave a speech and told everybody, he's like, do you really want this? Do you want to be separate? And everybody's like, yeah, that's what we want. And he's like, what the hell? Stop them. And then as soon as someone died, he like pulled off the guards because Gorbachev was definitely a peacemaker. He wasn't trying to do any enforcement. So then you now have Russia, which is the largest state. 50% of the Soviet Union's population is in Russia. And, they're like wanting to go capitalist. They had just, fallen into this entire world where This was the Soviet Union. It was a capital system, not capitalist, but a capital system that was controlled by the government, and they controlled everything. It was Soviet. So whether your daughter got a doll, it would be a standard doll that everybody got. Oddly enough, they also gave everybody teddy bears, which teddy bears were invented after Teddy Roosevelt, but sort of weird. But nonetheless, they all had similar things. Your clothes, where you got a job, it was like selected for you. So where you lived was an apartment they slapped up, try to get everybody an apartment. So this was the Soviet Union. And sort of when Russia decides to separate this is really like Putin's era of coming out of the KGB and working for the mayor and starting his time. But Ukraine has wanted its independence for forever. If you follow Ukrainian history, there's so many people like Ukraine didn't even exist, until 1991. It's like, that's not true. There are lots of regions all over. And if you check this history, there's the Kievan Rus that really started many years ago. And then the Kievskis and the Kievan Rus were mostly in Ukraine. And the Muscovites are the ones that were in Moscow. When the Mongolians conquered them, even before time, then you see, all of this was kind of an intermixing of areas. But the Muscovites became what are now modern day Russians. And Ukrainians are the Kievan Rus and the Kievskis, which speak Ukrainian. But during the Soviet Union, to promote government and education, Russia was 50% of the population. So everybody spoke Russian. So in order to get an education, in order to file anything with the government, in order to do anything, you had to learn Russian. So most of Ukraine, even through Kiev, spoke Russian. Doesn't mean they're Russian. I speak English. I'm not British. So, I mean, to Russians, this doesn't make sense. But I'm like, I don't know how to help you. I don't speak American. I speak English, but I'm not British. And so a lot of Ukraine spoke Russian because that's how they learned. It's what they were taught in school. The western part of Ukraine did not. They refused to speak Russian. So they spoke Ukrainian. It's where I was located. I've learned Ukrainian. But to really learn the Ukrainian way, they refused to do it. And there are some things we could talk about a little later about this Nazism and Bandera and how those fit into the realm and whether that is true or not. But nonetheless, Ukraine wanted its independence. So it got its independence in 1991, and it included Crimea, and it included all 4 oblasts, which are considered states that are now called the Donbass area. And so that was all part of Ukraine because it was part of the Ukrainian state. So that was done, finished. Now, in 1994, 3 years later, Ukraine was sitting on 2,000 nuclear armed warheads. 2,000.
A whole lot of warheads.
Yeah, they had a whole lot of them. And many will say, oh, but Russia controlled all the launch codes. That's true. But Ukraine controlled the warheads, which they could take and put on the back of a truck if they wanted. They're nuclear weapons. In order to dearm them, the world got together in Budapest. So the world got together in 94 in Budapest, and they signed what are referred to as the assurances. Assurances being different than a guarantee, but loose language, if you ask me. They gave assurances. Russia gave an assurance. The U.S. gave assurances. And what were they assuring? At the time, Ukraine was worried about only one of their neighbors invading them. Guess who?
The Russians.
Russia.
Yeah.
So the U.S. gave assurances, and they said, okay, well, Russia and the U.S. will come together and we'll create all these labs to help dearm all the nukes, these bio labs, which now a lot of people say, oh, the U.S. came and made these bio labs and making biological weapons. Russia and the U.S. made all of those labs, and it was to turn all of the nuclear warheads into fuel for their nuclear power plants. And then they sold many of the actual missiles that the warheads set on back to Russia. So this is where those biolabs come from, as the U.S. and Russia helped make them. It was to disarm most of the weapons. So in exchange for assurances, Ukraine dearmed. I'm not saying they had no real military at the time. Now, they were one of the largest states in the Soviet Union, excluding Russia. So they had quite a few, and many of their own people still stayed. So Ukrainian, it would be like Texas. If Texas separated, Texas makes up 20 to 25% of the armed forces. So if Texas were to separate, we'd have our own big army, right? So Ukraine had an army, but it wasn't in the same structure. It was quite chaotic, but they still had something, but nothing like they do now. So then you say, okay, well, we de-armed. We had insurance from the U.S. We have lots of things. The other part now to add in, we're going to go back a little bit in history, is when Poland, I forget the other two countries, but when they ultimately separated the same time around 91, 92 from the Soviet Union, they immediately left the Warsaw. They didn't get accepted into NATO for another 5 to 7 years, but they wanted nothing to do with the Warsaw Pact. And why did they run to NATO? Everyone's like, wow, NATO's, promoting and encroaching them. NATO never promoted or tried to bring anyone in. It was always by demand. All of these countries wanted to be part of NATO for one reason. They were afraid of one neighbor invading them. Russia. Yeah. Again, Russia invades. Okay, so that's what NATO was all about. So then 94, they got assurances. So in 2008, George W. Bush is now in Bucharest, not Budapest to get the two confused. Bucharest, which is Romania. And in Bucharest, George Bush was talking about like, yeah, we need to get Ukraine into NATO. I mean, they need some protection, right? And they were definitely, I'll even say, provoking. They were definitely trying to expand Ukraine into NATO, no question. Merkel came out at that time and said it would be too provoking to Russia to add into Ukraine. And at the same time, Germany being kind of the stable part of Europe economically and even somewhat militarily outside of France being, this world's second largest arms dealer, they wanted a buffer. So Ukraine was definitely a buffer. So even Germany would be like, actually, let's just leave Ukraine open and not have it part of NATO. So Merkel's like, it would be provoking. So Bush is like, fine, we're not going to do it. So they didn't even accept an application. They said, all right, NATO is not part of this at all. We won't even look at your application, Ukraine. Sorry. That's 2008. They never considered it or even thought about it again until after 2014, when Russia invaded Crimea and Donbass. So then it's like, okay, well, how did they invade? Nobody questions if they invaded Crimea, right? That's weird. They all skip that one. Like, well, but it's Crimea. It's like a holiday place. We should let them have it. Okay, that's weird. And then, but what happened in the Donbass region is worth exploring and understanding. So there's quite a few of these. I just use Gherkin because he's the most well known. But if you follow the dates of what happened in Donetsk, it was around April 6th. There's some riots that happen in Donetsk. They have about 1,000 people, and they're writing like, yes, we want to be independent. And there's definitely a pro-movement for being independent. It doesn't mean all of them want to be independent, but there's a movement for being independent. If you go to Oregon, you go to Texas, there's movements here to be independent. It's normal for any country, any state.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Texas for that.
Exactly. We live and breathe it. We're like, we have the right to secede at any time. So imagine a group that's similar to that, where they're like, I don't want to be Russian, but, they like to protest, to kick up arms. And the reason, I'll explain why they were protesting in here in a sec, but first let's walk through what Gherkin did. On April 11th, this gentleman by the name of Gherkin, who is his real name, he's a Russian. He worked for the FSB, which is the same thing as like the American CIA or the Russian KGB, the new version, FSB. He worked for the FSB, and he comes in under a false name, a pseudonym, trying to pretend to be a Ukrainian. He overtakes a government building, self-proclaims himself the independent Donetsk military armed force general, self-proclaims. This is all within this 1 week of these protests. Joins with 52 other, they say, gentlemen, and somehow already has weapons. And within a short amount of time, he ends up with tanks, lots of Russian weapons. But why that's important is he did that on the 11th. By the 13th is when Kiev sent tanks and troops to the Donbass region in Donetsk to stop the uprising. And that is a very interesting part that's important to understand, because that's a clear definition of an invasion. Whereas Russia will say, we didn't provoke anything. It's like they definitely provoked. Russia claims that Kiev came down and was killing all their citizens because they spoke Russian. And that's why Russia needed to invade to protect these Russian speakers. So to understand that is important, because Ukrainians all know very well what happened. Now, why were these protests happening? This is an important piece. Europe wanted to advance trade with Ukraine. They didn't want to allow Ukraine to be part of the EU. Ukraine wants to be more EU leaning. They want in the EU really bad. But Russia, of course, doesn't want them to. They want them to be inside the influence. Russia created an organization called the EAEU, not to be confused with the EU. So
No, I get it. Yeah.
you can also, I refer to it the CIS. It's also kind of that cooperative. The CIS is a collection of Soviet countries, and it's like a trade pack. They trade with each other, they share policies, they correlate together a lot, right? So even though Ukraine was there at the beginning of the signing of that, they did not ratify. So they never fully joined the group, but they did trade because they're next to all these countries. Well, Donbass area does more trade with Russia than anyone because they're right next to them, right? So all of the businesses that are in the Donbass definitely wanted to continue trade with Russia. Ukraine was trying to do a deal with the EU, and in order to get enough money to offset all the loss of business that the Donbass area would be receiving, they were going to get a $12 billion loan from the World Trade Bank to offer assistance to this entire group, right? So they would have less of a hardship opening up trade to those outside of Russia. And that friction was hard because they're like, man, you're taking away our business. So most of the protests that were happening in the Donbass were actually about the fact that the trade was going to go away from what was happening with their ability to trade directly with Russia. Had nothing to do with they wanting to be part of Russia or be invaded. This was just maintained. They wanted to be part of Ukraine, but they wanted, they wanted the trade deal to do a little more. So at the time, the president of Ukraine was Yanukovych. And Yanukovych was doing what the country wanted, what he ran on. And this is 2013. He was, running on the platform of being pro Europe, and they were about to sign this European agreement, this European accord that would approve this alliance. And coincidentally, he meets with Putin and secretly meets with Putin. We don't know about it until later, but he and Putin meet up at a conference and they meet secretly in an airport. Another thing about Yanukovych that's very interesting is north of Kiev, Yanukovych somehow, who's always been a bureaucrat, somehow ends up owning a piece of property that has an 18-hole golf course, an entire lake, an amusement park, a house that is something like 20,000 square feet. Jeez. And now it's a tourist attraction that's owned by the country of Ukraine as a historical site. But he ends up with this $300 million property. And he's doing renovations.
$300 million?
Yeah, very expensive. That's a lot of cash. Property. Yeah, especially for a guy who's making equivalent to like $25,000 a year. So later you find out most of this money is rerouted from Russia. So when you have Yanukovych, who is, and that wasn't exposed at the time, his dwelling that he owned, but he decides last minute, and we don't know till later that he actually met with Putin himself in person. We don't know that till later, but he decides last minute that he is going to reverse, and they're no longer going to do the EU agreement. Now they are going to sign an agreement with the CIS, which is the Russia Consortium of Trade. They're going to totally flip and make all trade go with Russia. Well, you can imagine all of Ukraine. Owning the Donbass would be like, well, that's great. Everybody else would be like, what? No, we want Europe. So at the same time, there was lots of Americans trying to support there. Even John McCain was there. And there's a lady by the name of Newland. Her last name's Newland. And yes, she had $5 billion over the 20 years, and she was trying to assist and help doing things. And she gets rolled into this place where they say, oh, she had $5 billion and she was just paying people to go protest. That's false. If you go to Ukraine, it will take you 2 seconds to know these people do not want Russian oppression. They want away from Russia, and they align with Europe. It would take them nothing to protest. So you don't need to pay these people. They'll protest. They do not want under the Russian rule. And so you have to understand that to think of why, like, it's preposterous to think that Newland needed to do any of this. That's why it's ridiculous to think that was thing, because they're going to claim most of the Russian propaganda at this time in history claims that the Americans led a coup in Ukraine. So the reason they say there's a coup now is because there's all these protests, which are called the Maidan protest. And the
Okay.
Maidan is like this big square. If you go to Kiev, and it's this gorgeous square, and by square I mean it's kind of like a park. There's a big road that goes through it, but there's this mall and has this big glass in there. It's just a gorgeous area, overlook the old town. And there's this hotel on the top here. It's called the Ukraine Hotel, and don't stay there. It's like the trashiest hotel. It looks amazing on the outside, but it's terrible on the inside. You like fall through the floors. Nonetheless, it's this gorgeous square, and these protests started happening because of this new deal to go with the CIS. The protests start just escalating. The more that there are people that are there and the longer they're staying, the more people are coming from farther away to join these. And it's just the whole country is saying, we don't want this Russian a deal. And it's more and more Yanukovych is being exposed as a Russian puppet. So then, in the mix of all of this, Yanukovych twice does order troops to go after citizens and quell it with force. They kill a couple of them. They kill a couple of citizens. Now, that isn't to be mixed up with a sniper. The sniper on the building is a separate incident. They still don't know who did it. They like to say a particular gentleman who ended up getting assassinated later was behind it, but it is still unknown who and what did it. There's one side says it's the West who did it. They set it all up to go crazy. Then there's those who say Russia did it. It's weird, but I don't know if you recall, but in 2014, there was a sniper on top of this hotel, Ukraine hotel, literally just shooting protesters.
I
Pretty
remember
crazy.
seeing the protesters getting shot because I was watching a video about how they're allowed to use live bullets now.
For protests?
Well, for illegal immigrants. And but
That's a new
ironically,
way to deport you back to heaven.
right? Well, if they tell you to leave and you don't leave,
Right.
you now have legal authorization there. The military
Wow.
does
I
to
didn't
shoot
know that.
them
I got
now.
to be careful. I've been detained by the border police in Poland.
Really? Wow.
Luckily, they didn't shoot me.
Well, they trying to think how they put it because they were essentially trying to like mimic it to like it's a different way of thinking in Europe, right? Like we're here, Europe doesn't want the average person to have a gun per se in a lot of European countries, but they're more than willing to shoot a protester, an illegal immigrant. Whereas over here, we're the opposite. We don't generally want to shoot immigrants, we want to kick them out. And shooting a protester here is, not something that is looked very positive upon.
We can go
So
back to Chicago for an example. Exactly what happened with the Democratic convention in Chicago. I mean, that's a similar, uprising of what happens.
yeah, I mean, it's just, it's a difference in because, I'm sure you've got, but now, man, I researched tons of random things. Yeah, I mean, how in God's name would I have came up with the Campbell soup thing before it blew up?
Right.
But when you're looking at all that, right? So, like with Ukraine's backstory, like is the future of Ukraine bright? Because I heard that the package that President Trump put forward was not a very
Well, here's
beneficial one.
yeah. I mean, it goes in so many circles. We all see this. I mean, how many times has Trump been accused of being Putin's puppet? And over and over and over, it looks like they really do have something on him. He constantly is going through these bouts of where he talks, he's like, well, Russia, you better do it or else. And then nothing happens. And we've gone through this so many times. And now we find out Witkoff is literally coaching Putin on how to talk to Trump and get his deal. Then we find out from Rubio that all the points that were put into this peace agreement are literally all of Russia's talking points. Who released it, we don't know. But I mean, more and more and more, this is just looking like Trump is trying to do any peace deal that helps Russia win. So now the real sticking point, and this goes back to the story where we were. It's like how did Putin get to here? And I honestly don't think he intended to make an invasion like this. If you follow through history, what he did in Georgia, very similar. He invaded Georgia. They gave it like 3 days. Not, I mean, they didn't have enough fuel. They just went down, made it a bit sink. They still occupy 2 parts of Georgia to this day. But they changed the leadership and they're like, okay, we control you. Let's go out. And then they leave, right? So they show a big force, scare everybody. They do what they do, tell them, and then that's it. So if you follow, they had 100,000 troops build up around the border. Biden, we all remember this. Biden was like saying like, they're going to invade. And even Zelensky's like, stop saying that. You're scaring away tourists. They're not going to invade. They say they're just doing drills. They invade and they didn't have enough gas to drive to Kiev. So clearly they weren't planning on fighting. And it's true. A real invasion, you don't have 100,000 troops. You'd have like 1 million. Right. So I think it's very clear that Putin had the plan of going in, scaring everyone, taking control, putting in his puppet government and saying, now get back to the CIS and do what I tell you. Putin wants control. He sees it as he's a follower of Alexander Dugin. They're Bolsheviks. So he sees it as Russia should control most of Europe, that the West is literally the devil and Satan. You and I are Satan and should burn in hell is their
Yeah, and
thought.
that's why they put up with Hitler. Why Europe does, because they seen him as a buffer between them and the Bolsheviks.
Yep,
Because back then they
exactly.
didn't call them the Soviets; they called them the Bolsheviks
Right,
because
the
it was the
Bolshevik.
Bolshevik revolution.
So they still believe in that. They believe that the Russian Empire should come back together, which makes up most of Europe. So if you follow that thought, where it really turned is he didn't realize Ukrainians do not want to be invaded. They didn't give in. They fought. If you remember, it was like grandmas making Molotov cocktails.
Yeah.
And the farmers driving tractors to try to haul off tanks. And it was crazy. The entire world was impressed. The U.S. was going to send a helicopter in to get Zelensky out. And he's like, I don't need a ride. I need ammo. And he was really, and this is where it shows how bad the U.S. has been a partner. For giving an assurance, for de-arming, we were so slow. And this is where I'm shocked that Republican hawks have not jumped in to take this angle. They've done the opposite. Biden era were so slow to give them anything. Every time he said it would take another 4 to 6 months to actually get it in the country. They would just drag it out. And I don't know why they wouldn't try to arm them much faster and try to get something out there quicker. And so all of their aid was really slow. But Republicans have seemed to come the other direction, saying like, why are we giving them anything at all? Right. And so the invasion itself has escalated to be where Putin did this invasion and it looked like he lost. So now he's like, okay, well, I can't do that. So then he's like, well, I'm going to go claim Donbass. So it looks like I did claim something for the country. Oh, yeah, that was ours. That was Russians. And then that didn't prove to be so easy. And he has had to dig in. And now there's 1 million Russian troops just on the Russian side. There's 1 million missing troops. And if you're Putin, you can't just million.
I didn't realize it was that many.
Yeah, 1 million missing troops. Now, chances are many of them are injured, but they usually say it's like a 3-to-1 ratio of, dead to injured. So Ukraine probably has the similar numbers, but usually the invading army attacks and gets injured at a 3-to-1 ratio too. So it's usually twice as much, but we really don't know any of the real numbers, but they're massive. There's 2.5 million people missing in the workforce as reported by the Russian Labor Department, but you don't know if that's just unemployment that's going up or not. But in general, there's the amount of equipment, like they're using old World War I tanks because their equipment's so wiped out. So they have donkeys and they're using bicycles on the front line. Kid you not, that is the frontline equipment. It's crazy. You're having to buy like your own camouflage uniforms. It's nuts. So yeah. So for now, Putin really can't stop, because now if he were to stop, he's messed up his entire country. They have turned into a army-based economy, but they have what's called the wealth fund. And this wealth fund is down to about 50 billion plus some gold reserves. So if you've heard recently, they're selling all their gold because their deficit is going to hit close to 80 to 100 billion this year. So he's got to sell gold to make ends meet. They're running out of money. Companies are shuttering. He can't afford to continue to pay his troops. So they got a problem. So for him, he needs a win. He needs to save face. So for Putin, he's like, I have to have Donbass. I need to have all of Donbass so I can look at all these people and say, that's why we did this. Great Russia controls Mother Russia. So Ukrainians know this oh too well. They're sitting on the other side. But, for them, These are amazing people. I'm not saying there's not corruption. There's definitely corruption. They are a fledgling democracy, but they are an independent people. They have their own language, they have their own culture, and there's no business for them to be invaded. And we, as a partner who gave them assurances to de-arm, should be assisting them. Instead of dragging out this stuff, we should be assisting them. So hopefully your next question is, what's the US's role in this? Because I'd love to answer
Yeah,
that one.
that's
Okay.
yeah. Well,
So here's really the heart of it is you say, okay, where does Russia fit in the world? And at the beginning of this, I told you a little bit where I honestly think October 7th is Putin's birthday for
yeah,
the Palestinians in Gaza to attack Israel on October 7th. I honestly believe Putin was behind funding most of that because it created a distraction for the world. He thought he could use it to slow down. It gave a reason the U.S. had to send less ammo to Ukraine and would give him the upper hand and take over. So just Russians love dates. They do lots of things on dates. So that's something to keep in mind. But Russia has been part of so much chaos in the world. I mean, as soon as Russia had to deal with its own thing, what happened to Syria? It fell, right? They're losing where they are. The Wagner group is now losing position all over Africa. So most of the chaos that happens in this world is now coming down a little bit, or you could say the world is leveling off a little bit now that Russia's not intermingling with so many things. So the U.S. is, kind of managing this global power, and so you say, okay, well, how to put Russia in check? What did it cost us? So for 63 billion in war credits, which is what we've given to Ukraine, which turns out by Berkeley study is only $18 billion worth of equipment. So that's all we've given them. And people say 300 billion. There's no 300 billion. We gave them 35 billion in economic aid. That's actual money, though. We gave them to boost their economy. Then we gave them 63 billion in war credits. And war credits, it's not cash. You just get ammo and guns for it. But it means we give them a whole bunch of old stuff and we invoice it as a big ticket item. But we buy new stuff. So we're already going to get rid of this stuff. So for our war credits, so we've given them less than $100 billion. Europe has also now passed what we have given them. So Europe has also given them lots of money. And so a lot of the scandal that you hear actually was European money more than it was US money for the energy side. But nonetheless, we gave them this money and we assisted them to 100 billion. So what did 100 billion get us? Which is actually it's less than 50 billion in actual stuff because it was 18. So then for our defense budget, which I don't know do we call it a war budget now? Because now we have the Department of War.
I don't. As far as I know, it's still defense budget, but
I don't know.
the
So
Secretary of War.
our defense budget's like 880 billion a year. Okay. And we gave Ukraine approximately 50 billion. And that's over now, pushing 4 years. So
It's really not that much when you think of the grand scheme of it.
Less than 1% of our defense budget, like way less than 1% of even an annual budget, we have gotten what? Russia, literally 75% of Russian equipment has been wiped out. Their entire army is wiped out. They wiped themselves out. How many American troops have we lost? Not a single one. We now have, and this is Texas, Houston is one of the largest suppliers. So we have tripled the amount of oil we sell to Europe now because Russia doesn't supply it, and that will continue. So the U.S. has made a fortune off of our resupplying all of our ammo and our weapons and all of our oil that we now sell all over Europe. And so if you add all this up, you're like, wait a minute, this is like, this is one of the best, most efficient, strategic military geopolitical efforts we could have ever made. Like, I mean, it's really cheap and it just benefits us. We've made a ton of money as a country off of it. I'm not saying we go and promote war, but I am saying as a strategy of supporting Ukraine, like this has been extremely cheap and extremely effective. We should probably help them do more. Now, then you have to take into this also the same side as just ultimate strategy. Trump is the art of the deal. I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Art of the Deal. It's actually not,
No,
it's
I
not a
haven't, but
great
I've never
book.
read it.
It's not a great book. So my mother-in-law gave it to me back in like 2006 before it was famous. And it was a terrible book then. It's even worse than that. I have an autographed copy, but it's it's interesting. There's one chapter called The Hair, and he writes in it like, why do I have to write a chapter about the hair? It's real. Leave me alone. That's basically the whole chapter. But nonetheless, this is a guy who wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. He went into office already disclosing what he'd give up. That makes no sense. If you were actually going to go to and have real negotiations with Putin, wouldn't you want to do the opposite? Wouldn't you want to say, we are going to arm Ukraine with anything and everything they need? We're going to supply them to the endless world. They have an open access to all of our arms. We're going to give them so much cash. Then you sit down and negotiate, because if you don't do that, you only get a benefit by saying you do that. Because now Russia is like, great, we're bleeding, we're broke, and they say they have an endless supply in Ukraine. We better negotiate. Instead, Trump says, like, we're cutting you off, we're giving you nothing, we're not going to take any of your done, we're done with you. You just take whatever you're given. That is arguing and negotiating on behalf of Russia from day one. And if you follow everything Trump has done, all of his negotiation tactics have all been in the benefit of getting Ukraine to take whatever deal Russia brings them. And now we have actual evidence where Witkoff is literally helping to coax them into doing it. And we have, Rubio, who has literally said, well, actually, all the points that you see on there, those are literally Russia's wish list that we're trying to shove down the throat of Zelensky. And what has Zelensky done in every single meeting? Every single meeting is like, okay, I'll take it. Let's have peace. Let's have peace. Okay, I'll do everything. I'll give you peace. And then we have Vance, who like totally mocks him, a guy for not wearing a suit and being disrespectful, which I'm like, what? If you go there, Ukrainians are extremely grateful. These are people who are terrorized. So while I was there, one night we had 700 projectiles fall from the sky. That's missiles, Shahed drones. They have Shahed drones that have propellers. They have Shahed drones that have rockets. Those are the ones that go real fast. But you'll be in any city and you'll just hear they're flying right overhead. So I've witnessed many attacks. And then that was 700 one night. And then the night I left, there were 600. But on any given night over the last 3 years, even though it's been 4 years, this happened on October 10th after they attacked the bridge. It's been nonstop. On average, there are 70 a night. That is just terrorism. Like they're just sending bombs attacking all civilian infrastructure. I'm not saying they're necessarily attacking civilians, but it is an attack on a civilian to attack civilian infrastructure. They're going after water, they're going after gas, they're going after electricity, anything they can. And if any of them, if you shoot 70 on average a night over civilian populations, some of them are going to get off target and they're going to hit civilians. And so that's where you see it's terrorism all over. So yeah. So right now, I think supporting Ukraine, and even if he lies, have him lie. Don't give him anything. Just lie and say, I mean, he's fine lying about everything else. Why doesn't Trump just say, listen, we're going to arm Ukraine. We're going to give them tomahawks, whatever they want. We are arming them to the teeth. Sit down and talk, Putin. That just makes basic negotiating tactics. I don't understand, but that's not what he's prepared to do. There's something very strange about our president and why he won't, push back on a country that is not worth even talking about. I mean, they have a $2 trillion economy on the best times. I mean, they don't produce anything major that the world needs. We have no trade with them. I don't know what he sees in Putin. It makes no sense. This is a third world country that we should just be like done with and like, okay, just help Ukraine and get out of it. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on where the US sits.
Well, man, I mean, we definitely covered a lot in the Ukraine part. I didn't realize that Ukraine was like, I mean, obviously I knew there was more too, right? I always talked about, or I always thought about, was it the Russian Orthodox Church is from Kiev?
Yes. Well, no, it's from Russia, but there's the Russian Orthodox Church, which is in Ukraine. But,
okay, that's what I was thinking.
And it gets a lot of things like, oh, Zelensky's pushing out the church. The Russian Orthodox Church is an organization where its leaders were literally spying on Ukraine. So as an organization, this is why it was banned in Ukraine, not as a religion. The religion was still able to practice all of its churches were open. The organization was not able to function because they were literally caught red-handed supplying information to Russia and providing targets for Russians to bomb. So I would say any country that has that, I mean, some of these churches were found to be armed, like literally having weapons under their church floors to give to people to attack on the earlier days, but it didn't work. So yes, the Russian Orthodox Church it's not a religion they're stopping. It is a terrorist organization, which is it's considered right now in Ukraine because they are literally trying to kill Ukrainian citizens.
So I mean, as we wind down here, like, I mean, God, guns and church floors, that's wild. I cannot like picture that. Like, is there gonna be an end to this war anytime soon? Just
Man,
from, because you obviously got a little bit more inside knowledge with like the people,
I have no more insight than you, but if I had to make a prediction based on what they're trying to do, one, Trump is really trying to get. There's a reason Thursday was the deadline. It's also the deadline to have nominees for
the whole Peace Prize.
the Peace Prize. So let's not fool ourselves. That's really all he cares about is the Peace Prize. And it's not going to happen. So it's really about Putin. What can Putin tolerate to end? Because if Ukraine stops fighting, Ukrainians die. If Russians stop fighting, we have peace. So that describes this entire invasion, and it describes who and where you actually need to negotiate with. So Putin needs to tell his people, because he's going to go through a massive recession when this does end. Because if he unplugs now the only source of capital that is working, which is wartime, any company that can produce something for the army is at least has some job. Everything else is shut down. There's no transportation working. I mean, trucking's out. So if that turns off, they're exporting missiles, which don't produce any money. And if you can think of that can only go for so long. Eventually, you have to sell something. So they're going to run out of cash. So what they are trying to produce is he wants all of Donbass. So Putin can't give up until he says, well, you either give us all of Donbass, because they don't have any oblast in its entirety. Ukraine sits on all four of them, part of them. And strategically, they hold all four of them in part of them. And so Putin is trying to say, give us all of those. He even had the nerve to say, well, there are Ukrainian troops occupying new Russian territory, which I'm like, wait a minute.
New
What?
Russian.
You're occupying existing Ukrainian territory. So Putin needs this to save face. Otherwise, if you follow Russian history, Russia has lost a lot of wars. That rhetoric is ridiculous. There's many wars that is lost, and on every single one of them is after it is when leadership has changed by massive protests. So that isn't remiss on Putin. He knows that if this stops, he has a higher chance of being kicked out of office and losing power than if he continues it. So Russia has no incentive to continue to do this. What he wants to do, what Putin really wants to do, is try to do as much as he can to make it look like Zelensky doesn't want peace. And that's honestly why I think Zelensky ultimately agreed to the latest terms, because he's like, we know Putin won't do a deal. So, but if we say we won't do these terms, then, we look like the ones. He wins. So Putin has now painted himself in a corner because he gave the wish list. He started this off with Witkoff, and now he's like, damn it, this happened again. Now I look like the idiot. Putin has never been seen that he wants peace ever. And Trump just keeps buying into it. So ultimately, I don't think these peace talks are going to work. I think they'll go through lots of rounds battling back and forth, and Putin's just going to keep shooting missiles, and he's going to try to push, because Zelensky cannot give the rest of the territories. That would make no sense. They're like, you have invaded us. You want us to just back off and let you invade us more? How do we know that will stop, right? And U.S. giving guarantees, these are hard. The U.S. gave an assurance in 1994. What guarantees do we have now? So again, and NATO, Putin doesn't care about NATO. Let's be honest. Everybody says NATO is in this, but it has nothing to do with NATO, because NATO wasn't an object to begin with. They were not going to be in NATO until they invaded. Now that they're invaded, it's like, okay, well, NATO's up, but that's not what he wants. He wants influence and he wants control. But he has to save face first. He couldn't get rid of Zelensky. He couldn't take control of Kiev, which he would love. So now he has to save face and say, okay, 1 million Russians have died but look what we got, all this land. And for Russians, that's a win. Russians want to be seen as an amazing global power. And so for him to do that, he looks like a global power, even though they have had their, they have just been served. Ukraine has wiped them out. They didn't even have a military in 2014, and now they have one of the world's most trained. They lead in drone technology. So yeah, Putin has a major problem that is given. That's why I don't think we have a peace deal coming here in the short run. I think we have lots of bickering going around, but it isn't going to happen until one, Trump can get China to come to the table. China and
Yes.
India have decided they are going to buy less oil, but these sanctions that they supposedly that Trump just put on Russia, they're on delay. So they're not in effect. Yeah. Because the peace deal. So Putin is dragging these out. And that's what I mean. Until they actually like Russia can't go forever. They can continue the war forever, but they can't continue the spending forever. And the truth is, until Trump can get China to come to the table and play hardball in the sense of, even if he has to lie, say, we're arming Ukraine to the end, actually negotiate and give yourself in a negotiating hand. Until we do that, you're going to just see this ever war. Now, it may end up like fizzling. And by that, I mean, when I went there in 2014, 15, 16, 17, there was war happening there the whole time. It was Russia. That
Yeah,
they like
that's for
14,000 people died during that time. So that was a war that everybody's just like, oh yeah, there's fighting over there, and just you go about your way. And this can be one of those where it's just a forever war. And there's just constant conflicts. Resco, I forgot to say the same. Oros, the last city that they just claimed, that was a fight of 300 troops. That tells you how thin and how hard this is to maintain the line on both sides. 300 troops fought for a month. And I mean, it's been a year. Their original plan was a year and a half to take this city on Russia's side. But their ultimate last fight, they had 300 troops were fighting for this one city that we're all talking about in the world. It's only 300 Russian troops. And about 120 Ukrainian troops are trying to stop them. So it's weird when you think about that's the line. We're talking about a group of 400 people fighting.
right.
You think it's like thousands and thousands, but the line is so thin. It's so hard to keep them champ. They're literally riding horses and bikes, armed to the tooth with like nothing. And most ammo that they have doesn't go anywhere. Like it's just wasted ammo they shoot around. This really has turned into a drone warfare to where if you can be seen by a drone, not a good thing.
You're a
Like on
target.
both sides. They now have drones that are tied to 5-mile length of fiber optic wire. So they wire them so they can't get intercepted. And then some of the greatest technology that I think comes out of Ukraine that's worth talking about. Ukraine has invented this drone. And by drone, it doesn't fly, it's on wheels, it's self operating. And it looks almost like a casket on metal wheels. It's very interesting. But the wheels kind of are flimsy and they move. So there was a guy who had been hit and he was there almost a week and they were trying to get to him, but they couldn't. So they send in this drone on wheels. It hit one IED on the road and it didn't blow off the tire. So the tire was flimsy, comes back in and goes. It went 70 miles an hour. Crazy. And got this guy. It opens up. He gets in it. It closes like a coffin, metal surrounding. It gets hit by 2 flying drones and brought him back to safety. That's crazy technology that isn't
A little
really
bit.
talked about, but it's amazing. And
Yeah, I've
Ukraine
never
is
even heard of that.
exactly that's what I mean. Ukraine is on the forefront of building all of this drone technology that they are now the most trained and equipped military in the world for doing anything. The US, here's another part of why the US has benefited from this. When we started this war, the US has spent about $2 billion in pre-research, but really it's about 10 billion in total research to ultimately get up to what they call the Switchblade drone. And the Switchblade, you probably don't remember it now, but in the beginning it was talked about, but they stopped talking about it really quick. And the Switchblade was like a little tiny rocket launcher about this big, and you go and you shoot it out, and it was this drone that would shoot out, and then like scissors open, it would have 2 sets of wings, right? And it was supposed to be this amazing new tack. It was a drone that would go kamikaze and launch into things. Well, it had one, very obvious problem. It couldn't go through trees. It was made for the desert, which is where we've been in Afghanistan for so long. Like, oh, it works, right? So it didn't work in Ukraine at all. Total flop. So now the US has been benefiting from all of this R&D technology and drone technology in Ukraine. So we spent 10 billion alone on this wasted one drone program that is a total flop, worthless. They were $5,000 a drone. And now we have this system where we're like, we can pop these things out for like $20 a piece. So again, the US has benefited from just R&D and new technology on the forefront of so many things without one American troop lost. So yeah, so that's where, unfortunately, I don't think we have a peace plan, even though, I mean, Putin has said, oh, I think we can work with this. And Zelensky said, we'll do this. But Putin's in it to say, okay, well, I have to push troops as much as I can to get to those borders, but he's broke, but he can't capitulate. It would be bad for him. So Putin's got to do this. And Zelensky's like trying to say, let's wrap it up. And then, of course, it's terrible timing, but Ukraine's in the middle of a massive corruption scandal that, equates to at least $100 million in kickbacks from, uncompeted energy contracts that were distributed that go all the way up. And I mean, we talked about this before, but there's no way Zelensky didn't know about it. I'm a huge Zelensky supporter in the sense that, here's a guy who said he's going to fight. He has been, giving it all.
Yeah.
But there is some clear corruption. And I worked in Ukraine. I also worked in Brazil. I compare it to Brazil. When I did stuff in Brazil, we built this home, this whole neighborhood of new construction homes. And there they use bricks, logos, and we were going to do it in Madeira wood, like an American construction. And when we went down there, we had to get the city approval, and then we had to get like the building department. And they sent us, they said, oh, well, you need this other group's approval. And everybody just kept saying we need their approval. So we're like, okay. So we go there and they have like an office and there's this whole thing. And they were a gang. It was a gang. That's what we didn't know. I mean, they didn't look like a gang. They didn't have like bandanas. Had an office, but they were the side corruption that everybody paid. And they had a few rules. One, we could not pay anybody over a certain price for excavation. We didn't bring in any equipment. They'd have 100 guys there to dig out the entire house with shovels. It was like, what? So there were just like rules, and we had to pay them. And so corruption isn't always easy to spot in some ways, but it usually comes out of poverty. And so Brazil was where you couldn't pay anyone more than like $1 a day or so. I don't remember when it was. It was, when was that, man? It was late 90s. And so this same thing, you see a lot of corruption in very poor places. In Ukraine, the average wage is $600 a month. In Russia, the average wage is about $590 a month. Both of these are very poor. Yep. Just an impoverished place. Do you know that 50% of Russians don't have a car? 20% of Russians don't have a toilet in their house. Yeah. Russia is a third world country. Moscow's gorgeous. Moscow's beautiful. It's all up to date. Once you leave, it's all like, I mean, it's a beautiful place in the sense that, they all have gardens, but they have gardens because they can't afford any other way to buy any food. So when Tucker Carlson did that whole thing where he went, oh, this is beautiful. And he went to subways, like, don't they have gorgeous subways? It's like, yeah, because Stalin killed 20 million people and enslaved them to build it. I was like, it's amazing what you can build with slaves. And then he compared like all the food you can buy. I was like, yeah, because if you look at parity, like they don't get paid anything. Of course you can, because your dollar's worth a lot more because you live in a rich country. So yes, all of Ukraine, and the one thing they have in Ukraine that I love is the food. It is just amazing in the sense that there's not a lot of exports, imports happening. And it's been that way for a long time. So anything you eat is really, sourced within 20 miles, whether it's the meat or the vegetables. And so you just get food that is unlike here, where I would venture to say that most restaurants are really just taking Costco food and putting it in different ways.
I would say I can say that is very accurate, more than most people in this country would think.
Right.
Even half your chain restaurants all do that.
Exactly. So it's not exactly the healthiest thing, but there, I mean, it's the healthiest food. I mean, you will find a difference in your own health eating there. And you're eating out all the time, but you're like, everything I ate, like I cannot find junk food here. It's like every meal is really healthy and really good. And then it's hard to come back here where you go to a restaurant, you're like, I can feel that, we're eating like soy oil something or peanut oil in there. It just feels different. Like I feel all greasy now and I feel clogged up. So the food there is amazing. The people there, I mean, they're all very self-sufficient. One example while, there's they have power outages, so they have rolling blackouts going on, as Russia keeps attacking
Naturally.
civilian infrastructure. These people are so resilient. They have started buying generators, and they have generators outside of every store. So as soon as the power goes out, give them about 2 minutes, and then you hear this buzz, and the whole city is running on generators, and they all have outlets, and they're sharing it with this person, that person. Everything's lit up, and freezers are back on, and they're back in business, just like that. I mean, just resilient people that are like, well, this is what they're going to do. What we press on. We're not taken to Russian oppression. So, just the most resilient people. And I mean, I've gone there so much that I've become somewhat blinded to it. But the first time, they have an app, and you run the app, and it'll tell you whenever there's a potential bombing happening in your area. And so it'll give you an alert, and then the entire city will go off. You'll hear this alarm you couldn't sleep through. And it would just happen so often that now anywhere you go, like the city alarm, you won't even, like, nobody even notices it. And your app phone, like, everybody has it turned off, and you'll see, like, and you'll see an explosion. It just blends in. I mean, there's too many now events that I have personally witnessed, but it just blends in. It just has become. And I do remember reading a couple of books about World War II in England being like that. And I was like, how could you not? Like, there's bombings. How are you not just like frozen underground? You find the people are resilient. They're like, listen, after this, we need a great country to come back to, and they're going to build it. And so there's nonstop. So even though soldiers are fighting on the front line, everybody else is really fighting just to keep Ukraine. And, just amazing people with their own culture. They are not Russian. Russian and Ukrainian share a common Slavic culture, but Ukrainians are an independent people. They did not derive from Russia. If anything, Russians derive from a Ukrainian language and a Ukrainian people, because Kiev Rus was based out of the Kiev areas. If anything, the Muscovites, that's what I mean, is the Muscovites are the ones that came out of there a long time ago. But there's lots of rhetoric and Russian propaganda in the US that is just not true in so many different ways. So,
Man, we could go on that for ever.
yeah, you open up a,
Jesus.
a bottle of,
Well, man, definitely gonna have to have a part two to this Russia thing, especially as this peace deal kind of starts
it will
to
be interesting to see how it
unwind,
happens.
man. But Joe, tell everybody about where they can, keep up with, you and what you're building.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really talk about Loca. I am building my next company is Loca, and Loca is really connecting local consumers with local businesses. It's really hard if you're a local business to find new customers. They, can spend a lot of money on Google. They can do Facebook. They can do Instagram boosts, but it's not going to help them find local customers. And so we have some new tools coming where you'll be able to pay rent and get cash rewards. You'll be able to pay your utilities, get cash rewards. And right now you can go on and you can create content for local businesses and get cash rewards. You can shop for local businesses, get cash rewards. So real easy, one app, lots of local businesses and lots of ways to get cash rewards. It's so simple. It's loca.us. And on myself, probably easiest to find on Twitter. It's Joe_Edgar_, where I think I'm funny and I do lots of bad mouthing. And, I'm probably the worst troll out there. So I make lots of commentation, everything from, this new, I told you about when Trump came out with Republicans, where I call it Trublicans, and made a white elephant as their logo. So here comes Trublicans. But yeah, you follow me on Twitter and easily message me there. Super easy. But loca.us, check it out. If you're a local small business, it's a great way to find and reward customers.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, small businesses are the backbone of the future. I mean, that's how, because every big business started out as a small
Exactly.
business.
They are 95% of all the businesses in our country.
So hard to believe. You know what I mean? Like, you're just like, really?
No, there's that many of them.
You
42
know,
million.
wow. Joe, 42 million. Thanks again for, coming on and especially really giving a lot more nuances and detail about Ukraine, right? Because you hear like both sides right on the media, right? But you don't hear what a lot of people don't hear when you listen to the news is the nuances of why certain things are the way they are. And that's why a lot of people feel lied to, is because they don't hear the nuances, right? Like, you got to know to a degree, right? If you go to
Well,
Germany,
it's hard to know all the nuances. There's so much to know into it. So I don't blame people either.
Well, I mean, maybe like when the news is reporting certain
Mm,
things, they give a little bit more of the
yeah,
nuance
the
of
red herrings.
why. Yeah, they for instance, if you go to Germany, you're going to learn the nuances of beer, right? That's, or when, if we report on weapons in Germany, they talk, but when it comes to Ukraine, Russia, they just seem to go fighting, killing, there might be some peace.
Right,
We're going to repeat it
exactly.
about six more times.
Corruption, money, Putin, Trump,
Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah,
that's kind of like the
we've heard
gist of
so
it.
much of it, we're just like, I just
Right, you're like, "All right, what's the next step? Is there an end here? Is there an end game to all of this?" And you gave a little bit more clarity, which I'm gonna tell you was definitely beneficial for me, because 'cause I'm all about clarity, and I'm sure you figured out now, I'm a very curious person. I'm gonna ask a gajillion things,
I love it, I love it.
but, everybody, if this conversation hit you, do me a favor, follow us on Rumble. That is where we're really trying to grow because it is content creator friendly. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway on here. Audio listeners, make sure you're checking us out on
And I
Spotify or
found you. I
Apple.
listened to your Campbell Soup story on Rumble, and it was fantastic. So, and you were
Yeah,
on
and
the
I
forefront of
appreciate it.
that story. So, jump in.
That I'm not gonna lie, that I got that story doom scrolling. I will not lie to you. I was drinking coffee in the morning and I'm sitting there and I'm like, whoa, what's this? And then next thing you know, an hour and a half later, I've got like 2 pages of notes that I wrote down, like, and my wife's like, good grief. She was like, enjoy the moment once in a while. I'm like,
Right.
I'm enjoying the moment really well right now. I'm
Exactly.
like, this is
Exactly.
gold. But yeah, everybody don't, tune in, download it, Spotify, check out the newsletter. Definitely check out a Joe's work, and especially, just keep following stuff for Ukraine. And like, hopefully at some point we can say, hey, it's peace there, and I
I
don't know if
hope.
there's ever actually truly peace, but it sounds like Putin may run out of money sooner or later, which would be
I
a
hope for that
godsend.
too. I hope for that too.
And it's thank God that China and India are finally coming to their senses and going, okay, this isn't good for us either. And I really did appreciate when Trump pretty much told India either A, you kind of back
Yeah.
off,
Exactly.
or we're gonna start sanctioning you too. And I'm like, okay, exactly. Like pull the rug out from the money. You
Well,
pull the
not
money,
only
you pull everything
India's
else.
interesting because they were buying oil, refining it, and reselling it. So they were literally trying to capitalize on it. At one
They were
time, they were
reselling it back
selling
to
it
Russia.
back to Russia, but they were selling it to other countries. So they literally didn't need oil. They were just like, "Hey, it's cheap, and I'll resell it at a higher price." So they were just trying. They were, being an arbitrage and just making money off the fact. So it's like, well, come on, that's terrible.
Wow. Did not know that. But everybody, thanks for tuning in tonight. Don't forget to check out this episode, and there's going to be more to come in the future. Have
Thanks
a
for
good
having me,
night.
Joe.
Thank you.